Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to all of you. It's really a great pleasure to welcome you today in this Geneva-Vienna dialogue on the world drug problem. I'm not going to speak much because we have a very good panel with very high-level panelists that I very much thank them for being here today. And of course, I'm welcoming you on behalf of the main sponsors of this event, Austria, Switzerland, the Global Commission on Drug Policy, and Mexico, as well as the co-sponsors, Albania, Canada, Colombia, Greece, Guatemala, the Netherlands, Norway, Paraguay, Portugal, and Uruguay. We are very glad to have this dialogue. We all know that there is a growing recognition on the diverse complexities of the world drug problem and the need to develop human balanced drug policies that fully address the implications of drug production, trafficking, and consumption while promoting the well-being of individuals. We know, and all of you have received a concept note regarding this event and why we are doing it. I think it has been broadly recognized by the United Nations that effective actions require coordination. And just let me remind that Resolution 71/211 and 72/192 mandates all relevant UN bodies to implement recommendations adopted in the framework of the world drug problem. And we are very happy for that reason to receive today representatives of the different agencies, UN bodies that are dealing with issues related to drug, with the idea of exchanging information. I think exchanging information while respecting the mandates of each of these bodies will help us to be more effective when countering the world drug problem. So I want really to welcome Dr. Sumaya Swaminathan, that is the Deputy Director General for Programs. She's coming in the absence of Dr. Tedros Adhanom. You know that he was confirmed, and just last night he told us that due to an unforeseen situation, he is not able to join us. But Dr. Sumaya Swaminathan is here and will deliver a message on behalf of Dr. Tedros. We also have Ms. Kate Gilmore, that is the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you so much, Kate, for being with us today. Mr. Bernard Leroy, that is a board member of the International Narcotic Control Board. Mr. John Brandolino, Director of the Division of Treaty Affairs of the UNODC, and Professor Michael Yashashwin, that is Commissioner of the Global Commission on Drug Policies. All of them will be moderated by Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro, that is the permanent representative of Mexico to the UN office in Vienna and the chairperson of the on the Commission of Narcotic Drugs. So I thank you so much. I'm not going to speak more. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to listen to all your comments this morning. Thank you, and Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro will continue the moderation to give the floor to Dr. Sumaya Swaminathan to deliver the statement on behalf of Dr. Tedros. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in Geneva, and thank you for the introductory words by Ambassador Socorro Flores. In order to start, and for the sake of time, we will go straight into our panelists and speakers this morning. And then, of course, I would like to make some brief remarks as well from as chair of the CND, but very happy to be here with you. So what I can say is that in my capacity as chairperson of the Commission and as part of the continued and increasing dialogue between the CND and other relevant United Nations entities and other intergovernmental organizations and civil society, it's very good that we are seeing all these collective responses to the world drug problem. And but before I continue, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sumaya Swaminathan. I just hope I pronounce it correctly so that we can hear from her, and then I will come back to each of our panelists, and as I said, I would also be saying a few words on how do we see the CND going on, what have we achieved, and what is the future for 2019. So, Dr. Swaminathan, you have the floor. Thank you very much for here with us this morning at a very important and significant side event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I bring apologies from Dr. Tedros, who was really very keen to be here himself but he was called away at the last minute due to some urgent other commitments. And so I'm representing him today, and I also have many colleagues from WHO, Dr. Mary Angela Samau, who's Assistant Director General for Access to Medicines, and colleagues also from our Division of Non-Communicable Diseases. So I look forward to a very constructive dialogue. First of all, I'd like to thank Mexico, Austria, Switzerland, and the other co-sponsors for convening this important meeting. As you all probably know, just a few weeks ago, we celebrated our 70th birthday, 70 years since WHO was founded in 1948, on the conviction that health is a human right to be enjoyed by all people, not just a privilege for the few. Everyone, regardless of who they are or where they live, should have access to quality health services that they need and the health products that they need without facing financial hardship. And 70 years later, we still have the same commitment, and we have a new 5-year strategic plan, our general program of work, in which we have 3 big strategic priorities of keeping people healthy, keeping people safe from outbreaks and emergencies, and also serving the vulnerable. So the commitment and the principles are only getting stronger as time goes on. The world drug problem presents 2 main challenges to the fulfillment of this vision. The first is the challenge of preventing and treating the harms that are related to drug use. And the second is the challenge of ensuring access to drugs which have medicinal use. And as we all know, many of the drugs that we talk about, the narcotics, have important medicinal uses. So addressing the problem really requires that we all work together to solve both the issues of preventing the abuse but also ensuring that people have access, and it has to be done in a balanced way. The opioid crisis in the US recently has brought a sharp focus to this issue, but this problem is not new. It's a crisis that shows that it's time to consider alternative approaches to addressing the world drug problem. And to do this, we must bring human rights and public health to the forefront of our discussions. And of course, WHO's mandate is really on ensuring the public health rights of individuals every year. We have a situation of 500,000 people dying from drug use every year. The majority of these could be prevented. WHO has carefully assessed the harms of many of these drugs, and as you know, we run the Committee on Drug Dependence, which assesses every year the drugs that need to be put on the list of under international control. And this included recently recommending that carfentanil, which is a tranquilizer for large animals, an analog of fentanyl, that has been used in the production of street drugs, be placed under the strictest level of international control. The UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs considers these recommendations that the WHO makes and voted recently to adopt these recommendations, which will prevent deaths of vulnerable people who might unknowingly take this deadly substance. But an approach that focuses only on restricting access or limiting access to potentially harmful substances deprives millions of the health care that they need, like the lung cancer patient in India who gets no relief from the excruciating pain because of morphine shortages, or the burn victim in Nigeria who wakes at night screaming in pain because the hospital at which he's being treated does not have access to medicines that can ease his suffering. We hear many accounts of the harms of excess opioid use, but the shocking truth is that 75% of the world's population lacks access to pain relief and palliative care, which contributes to avoidable suffering for millions of patients and their families. And this is a problem not just in low and middle income countries, but also in high income countries, where only a quarter of pain needs are adequately managed. As part of our commitment to achieving universal health coverage, WHO works to ensure that opioid, analgesics, and other controlled medicines are available to people who need them to reduce the pain and suffering. So the question is really, how can these drugs be used in a controlled way and in a way in which they are prescribed responsibly? The WHO list of essential medicine, which is the global standard for products that should be available in all countries based on the best available evidence looks at what drugs really should be available in all countries, and many of these opioid analgesics are on that list. On the other side, we also work to support the needs of people who use drugs and who often do not get the prevention and treatment services that they need because of stigma and discrimination, but most importantly because of criminalization of drug use in countries, which prevents these people from seeking access. And we see this in relation to also the epidemics of HIV and hepatitis, which often disproportionately affect those who use intravenous drugs. But because of criminalization, of course, they don't have access to health services. So our activities include the development of guidelines for prevention, treatment, and care of problematic drug use, and in particular of drug dependence. It includes harm reduction services such as needle and syringe programs, and we've seen that in countries which have introduced the use of safe needle and syringe programs have dramatically reduced the incidence of infections related to the use of unsafe needles. Opioid substitution therapies to prevent, and this also helps to prevent the transmission of infectious diseases. And our mandate includes ensuring the availability of medicines like naloxone, which can save lives by reversing overdose. And I think we all saw recently that the Surgeon General in the US recommended that citizens actually carry naloxone with them in order to be able to treat overdose when they see it happening somewhere in a public space. So UNODC, INCB, UNHCR, and WHO each play a critical role in reducing the human suffering caused by drugs and promoting evidence-based drug policies. Thank you for your commitment and for this event, and I look forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Swaminathan for your kind words and your presentation this morning. As you know, this is probably one of the first sessions where we have a dialogue or a work between Geneva and Vienna, trying to promote synergies within the own mandates and each mandate of all organizations that have to do with the drugs issue and the drug problem. So the World Health Organization is very important. As you know, we had for the first time at the last CND the presence of the director of the World Health Organization last year. This year we had a very important also video message, and it's important for us because we think that the synergy that we need to create is important, and because each organization has its own mandate, but within the mandate we can collaborate and enhance international cooperation, which I think it's very important. So this is a reason why this is a very unique opportunity. You have already mentioned, Dr. Swaminathan, about public health and human rights. You have also commented on the implementation of UNGAS 2016 and so on. But if I had to ask one important question would be, what areas of opportunities do you think exist to strengthen interagency coordination and collaboration, including the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the UNGAS outcome document, the recommendations of UNGAS as a whole? What would you say about on this from the mandate of WHO?
I think the first step would be to really have a shared understanding of the two sides of this coin. You know, the control and avoidance of abuse of the drugs on one hand, but there are many health aspects on the other side, which include being able to reach people who are using drugs in order to give them prevention and treatment services. But also the other aspect is, how do we use some of these drugs in a responsible way to treat pain? Because very often you are in a situation where the only option really is to use opioids for palliative care and for severe pain, especially towards the end of life care and so on. So I think for each agency to understand what the requirements are and how laws need to be adapted in countries or made in countries, policies and so on. I think if we have the same message, if we have a shared understanding and we're able to communicate this, I think it would help member states actually make more informed policies.
Well, thank you very much for that and for your kind presentation. On my side, I would like to say that, again, it's a great pleasure, to be here and to be part of, I just hope, a continued dialogue, an increasing dialogue between CND and other relevant United Nations entities and other intergovernmental organizations, as I have said before, as well as civil society, towards improving our collective responses to the drug problem. Allow me first to, as well, to express my sincere gratitude to Ambassador Flores, as well as to her team and that of the permanent missions of Austria and of Switzerland, and other co-sponsors for the hard work that has been undertaken in organizing this very productive event. My remarks will be rather brief, as I believe we all wish to hear these very good panelists that are here with us this morning and who are important members of different interagency organizations. But I did want to provide some background on this collaboration and on the efforts to further promote this interaction between Geneva and Vienna. As you are all aware, the contributions from a number of multilateral bodies and international organizations were instrumental in the lead to the 30th special session of the General Assembly on the World Drug Problem, as well as during UNGAS 2016, where the heads of a number of these organizations took part in the general debate and in the interactive multi-stakeholder roundtables. In the UNGAS outcome document itself, member states recognize that the world drug problem remains a common and shared responsibility that should be addressed in a multilateral setting and resolve to take the steps necessary to implement its operational recommendations in close partnership with the UN and other intergovernmental organizations and civil society, and to share progress with the CND. Furthermore, as part of the broader work and mandates of the Commission, both the UN General Assembly and the CND have adopted resolutions that call for intensifying coordination and cooperation among United Nations entities within their respective mandates. And I would like to mention some examples. In their efforts to support member states in the implementation of international drug control treaties in accordance with applicable human rights obligations. Another example is to support mainstreaming a gender perspective in policies and programs related to the world drug problem. Also, another example would be as part of a comprehensive, integrated, and balanced approach to strengthening health and social welfare measures in addressing the world drug problem. And also for the implementation of comprehensive and balanced development-oriented drug control programs and viable economic alternatives, in particular alternative development. In this regard, I can gladly report that Vienna has come a long way. On the institutional side, we have all warmly welcomed the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and the World Health Organization in February of last year, and most recently the heads of Incb, UNODC, and WHO adopted a joint statement on the implementation of the UNGAS 2016 recommendations. Regarding the deliberations of the Commission, it is worth noting that at its anniversary 60th session, the former Director General of the WHO, as I said, honored us with her participation at the opening session of the Commission. And while this year it was not possible for Dr. Tedros to be with us, he was well represented, as I also mentioned, through a video message. We also have Dr. Mariangela Simao, who is here with us, so thank you very much. And we have also increased our cooperation with sister commissions of the Economic and Social Council in New York, such as the Statistical Commission and the Commission on the Status of Women, and we enjoyed a virtual joint session last March, which I think it was the first one, and I think it was also very productive and very nice. And moreover, the CND has seen an increased presence of representatives from international organizations, particularly from our neighbors in Geneva, during deliberations and side events on the margins of the formal sessions of the Commission, participating in thematic debates at its intersessional period, as well as in a number of technical and expert group meetings organized by UNODC. I am sure that my distinguished colleagues from UNODC and Incb will be able to provide more details on the day-to-day work undertaken in Vienna, as well as in the field, and I particularly look forward to hearing from our Geneva-based guests. We have already heard from WHO about their initiatives carried out by the organizations and undertaken at their own governing bodies, so that I would conclude and move on to the intervention by our panelists. So, having said that, I would like to move to OHCHR, Ms. Kate Gilmore, and I'm very happy to see you here this morning. It's very important for us to have this side event with such an important agency being present, and I think it's very important because in 2015 and again this year, the Human Rights Council mandated the Office of the High Commissioner to produce reports to inform the processes, first of August and now on the CND discussions to be held next year. So, Mrs. Gilmore, thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much for the opportunity to join and the privilege to join such a distinguished panel. And it's a great pleasure to be here across the UN system, particularly with WHO at the lead and under the stewardship of Mexico, both in Geneva and Vienna, but also all the sponsors of this important event. From a human rights standpoint, and at the invitation of the Human Rights Council, of course, we have been exploring what does the lens of rights illuminate in regards to the situation of rights under the current dominant paradigms of public policy addressing drug use. Here's the result. And you only have to listen to this one sentence, and the rest is all background noise. No. The global war on drugs has failed. Today, both supply and consumption of drugs simply larger than ever. As Einstein famously observed, to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result is the very essence of delusion. And whatever its point of origin, perspicacity as a soundbite. The use of war on drugs as a metaphor in policy and practice has converted on distressing scale to a war on drug users. And with it brought and broadened a malicious and permissive space for excessive use of force in enforcement modalities, fueling a deeply pernicious public discourse, fanned wildfire-like by sensationalist accounts in the media, whereby today in cities, townships, villages around the world, those identified as using drugs are perceived somehow to be less than human, antisocial, depraved, immoral. You know, in policy and leadership, as in life, language matters. It matters a lot. And in the construct of the dehumanising policies of the iron fist on the war on drugs, the archetypal drug user may be at the centre. Fear-based, discriminatory, plain ineffective policies, policing, operational practices violating fundamental rights, their human rights. The quintessential cure, far worse than the original complaint. Of course, friends, it's not the captains of culture, commerce, church, or capital addicted to and abusing narcotic relief for their aches and pains who are subjected to the egregious consequences of this war. If you doubt just how unjust and unfair and costly has been this approach, look no further than its cruelly disproportionate impact on the extremely poor and the very young. It is the extremely poor and tragically the very young who are populating prisons replete with those whose crime was to use drugs, who are populating the morgues of those who were arbitrarily deprived of their right to life in the name of the war of drugs. And that is costly in so many ways. In fact, it's proactively costly because around the world governments are investing huge amounts in this military security complex answer through the war on drugs to a problem that is not bending to that influence or that framing. The gift that we have in the result of UNGAS's session on the world drug problem last year, in 2016, invites us in Einstein's proposition to stop doing the same thing. And in that, unanimously, by consensus, the international community gave us a way forward for more effective, more efficient, more just and more humane approaches in which no one need be rendered casualty, no one need be left behind. And we fundamentally believe that together it's our duty to honour the commitment of that very important outcome. But we won't fulfil the instruction of UNGAS if we continue to fail to recognise on such a scale that people who use drugs have rights inalienable. Rights do not melt away in the spoon in the spoon as might heroin. Rights don't fade away as the body deteriorates as a consequence of the toxicity of drugs. Rights prevail. And with rights comes a discipline for the state to make the difficult arbitrage that is needed. It's why the state has powers to arbitrage my rights versus your rights in such a manner as not to destroy the sum of our rights. No one's rights are elevated when someone else's rights are destroyed. But that is, in fact, the effect of the war on drugs. And for those who have least defence in the face of its footprint, children, people already in prison, people without the resources of legal defence, people living life exposed to military security operations, the costs for them are frankly inhuman. These are short-sighted, stigma-based policies with dire consequences for our world. If they were working as a Human Rights Office, we'd have a lot of trouble. But friends, they're simply not working. And they're not working because over history and time again, as member states have affirmed, and this is the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, subjected to scrutiny over those decades, time and time again, we have had to learn the lesson that any policy or practice that singles out a group for deprivation of their fundamental rights to the dignities of health, of shelter, of protection from extrajudicial executions, arbitrary killings, arbitrary detention, torture, any practice that relies upon those instruments is a practice that ultimately is far worse than the issue it is designed to address. Surely we don't have to learn this again on the backs of those who either need drugs and are deprived them, or who are using drugs in ways that we have been criminalising. The war on drugs has failed. Time to do something entirely different.
Thank you very much. May I ask you a very quick question about your presentation, which I really enjoyed, is how do you think, how does the OHCHR good plan to contribute to the mainstreaming of human rights along the UN system? I think this is a...
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
We are delighted to be in partnership with colleagues WHO, UNDP, UNODC, and we're in partnership globally articulating guidelines to establish a human rights-based standard for drug policy and good practices. And most importantly, at country level, we're engaged as part of the UN system in providing technical cooperation to governments in pursuit of that purpose in every region of the world.
Thank you very much for that. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bernard Leroy. I'm very happy to have you here. You have already been introduced by Ambassador Flores. And the INCB, you know, it's a very important entity and they play a very important role. And we would love to hear from you as well on the many issues and the most important issues that the INCB has to deal with. And just to mention that the INCB's annual report this year explored the links between human rights and drug policy, focusing on treatment, rehabilitation, and social reintegration for drug use disorders. We would like to listen whether there could be other areas where you believe could be subject to further review, for example, and also areas to which the INCB dedicates more attention to ensure an international strategy that is comprehensive, integrated, and balanced to counter the world drug problem. So good morning again. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Thank you, Mr. Leroy.
Madam Chair, distinguished co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the International Narcotic Control Board, I wish to thank the organizers for having extended an invitation to the board to participate in this important event. Since 1912, the final objective of the Drug Control Convention is, according to the will expressed by the member states, to safeguard and promote the health and welfare of humanity, which continues to be threatened by the world drug problem. The international legal drug control framework evolved as a result of the acknowledgement by states that common threats needed shared responses. Similarly, the organization of events such as this one reflects the consensus among Geneva and Vienna-based organizations that the only way to achieve viable and sustainable solution to address the world drug problem is through dialogue, flexibility, and cooperation in the carrying out of our respective mandates. As the board has reiterated on several occasions, the concept of welfare of humanity is one which cannot be dissociated from the full enjoyment of human rights. While in Chapter 1 of its 2017 annual report, the board chose to focus specifically on the issue of treatment, rehabilitation, and social reintegration of persons affected by drug use. The full report reiterates the board's strongly held view on the centrality of human rights as an essential component of a balanced and effective drug policy. For example, the board calls for the adoption of criminal justice policy by states to address drug criminality, which is proportionate and which respects due process rights and the rule of law. The board also encourages states to avail themselves of the possibilities provided in the drug control instrument to apply alternatives to conviction and punishment, such as education, rehabilitation, or social reintegration, whenever possible, and to refrain from imposing capital punishment for drug-related offenses. Extrajudicial responses to drug-related criminality are in clear violation of the International Drug Control Convention, which requires that drug-related crime be addressed through formal criminal justice responses, as well as of the universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which require adherence to internationally recognized due process standards. Where the board becomes aware of the pursuit of policies by states adopted in the name of drug control which violate the human rights of their people, the board has condemned these measures and has publicly called upon the states in question to take immediate remedial action. This is an area in which further cooperation between the Incb and OHCHR could be intensified through a more fluid exchange of information. The board has also called upon the international community to support alternative livelihood initiatives to help farmers produce alternative crops and to help. Over the years, Incb has continued its fruitful cooperation with the WHO in this area, including through the drafting of joint publication and in the participation in joint initiatives. In 2016, the Incb published a report entitled Ensuring the Availability of Narcotic Drugs and Psychoactive Substances for Medical and Scientific Purposes, based on an extensive survey of national regulatory bodies which identify obstacles to availability and contain recommendations from remedial measures. In addition, recognizing the fact that the inadequate availability is often caused by the limited resources and training opportunities for national regulatory agencies, Incb has launched its Incb Learning Initiative, which aims to train the staff of national regulatory bodies through regional training workshops and the development of online training tools. So far, workshops have been held in East Africa, Central America, Oceania, Southeast Asia, and Europe. WHO officials are invited to exchange with the board, and video conferences between both bodies are held regularly when the board is in session. The board has also invited OHCHR to attend one of its future sessions to strengthen dialogue on matters of common interest and concern. 189 states ratified the 3 UN conventions. They are totally free to amend them, that is their privilege. In its dialogue with states on compliance with the 3 international drug conventions, the board will continue to encourage them to adopt legislative and policy measures to address the world drug problem, which promote health, human dignity, and the respect of human rights. The board looks forward to continuing its cooperation with its partner in Geneva on these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leroy, for this very clear and straightforward presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to my very good friend John Brandolino, who came also all the way with me on yesterday's flight from Vienna. He was with me all along the negotiations of the last CND. So thank you very much for being here. Doris is also here. She's at the back. And who have been also very supportive. And it's great to have you here. And it would be great to hear from you about how UNODC collaborates with Geneva-based agencies in addressing the public health and the human rights and dimensions of the world drug problem. But in particular, you are very knowledgeable on this interagency collaboration that has been developed for the past months and years. So thank you, John, for being here.
Thank you, Ambassador, and really it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure seeing you chairing this dialogue, but also thank you to all the sponsors for this, because I think this is an important dialogue to keep the connections among all the players, not just the UN entities, but the member states, the civil society, and others that play an important role in dealing with the world drug problem. The executive director, Fedotov, really was sorry he could not make it. He sends his regrets, and he shares my view that this dialogue is an important part of connecting what's happening in Geneva and also what's happening in Vienna. I'll answer your question. We're doing a lot with UN agencies here in Vienna, but I'll start by basically giving you the vision and strategy of UNODC, if I may, because some in the room may not know UNODC so well as an organization and what we do in Vienna. But we, the vision that we have obviously for the world drug problem is no surprise, based on the key documents and commitments made by the member states. So it's basically the drug conventions, it's the 2009 action plan and declaration, and it's most recently the UNGAS outcome document. And the UNGAS outcome document is probably most known to people here, because I think all of these documents touch upon the issues of interest to Geneva, things like human rights, health and treatment, availability and access of drugs. But I think the UNGAS document clearly provides more detail and I think meat to the bones of those issues. They've always been a part of addressing the world drug problem, but now we have a lot more to kind of, as Kate mentioned, to kind of run with. And these really provide, and I have to say the UNGAS outcome document has really opened the debate in Vienna, because just a few years ago we had 20 side events. We now have over 100, and as the ambassador knows, most of those, if you look at them, they deal with issues such as health, treatment, access, availability, human rights. In fact, very few these days seem to kind of deal with kind of the law enforcement and the supply kind of aspect of, although they are important parts. Alternative development is a hot topic. We had over the last CND, almost 130 countries represented. We had over 100, I think, NGOs represented, almost 30 international organizations. So the participants in the debate, and by the way, everybody here in Geneva participating is quite wide and quite great to see. So we have this vision, and so what we do, we have both a blessing and a curse to be the agency that is the kind of global forum for all aspects of the comprehensive aspect of the drug problem. Because as you can see from the UNGAS document, it's huge what needs to be covered. I mean, read that document and you will just see and aspects that go far beyond what's covered here in Geneva. I mean, we don't think that we can do it all ourselves. We believe that obviously people have mandates that are more specialized in some of these areas, and so they need to be on their own moving forward and helping and contributing. And in many situations we are moving together. We need to do more joint efforts, and I'll get to those in a few minutes. But our strategy is really three-pronged. First, we try to provide, as I mentioned, the global forum where all aspects of moving forward with the vision can be discussed and the latest developments debated. And where all countries, this is important, where all countries feel welcome to participate, and which welcomes the contributions of civil society, international organizations, and academia, including the Global Commission and others that obviously have a great interest in this debate. And they all do participate in the intercessional meetings, the formal meetings of the Commission. Second prong is to provide data and independent analysis related to the world drug problem, which member states and others can use as they see fit. And this is mainly in our kind of flagship report, the World Drug Report, which comes out annually. It's going to be released next month, and the most latest one. And actually we have chapters focusing on drug use related to women, drug use related to older people, drug use related to children. So some interesting, we're taking some of the issues raised in the UNGAS outcome document and trying to focus on them. And as I think Incb has in its report, which is obviously they have a different mandate, a different purpose, but we're trying to use that as a bit of a guide, and so as we discuss the issues in our reports. And then the third prong is, and this is an important one, to provide assistance in capacity building on the ground to help member states move forward with this vision. I don't know if many of you know, but we are 95%, as an organization, 95% donor funded. And almost all of that funding goes toward assistance on the ground. We have presence in almost over 70 countries. 80% of our people are on the ground for UNODC, not in Vienna. And we, what we do, I mean, we're engaged in a wide range of take anything from the UNGAS document, and likely we have some type of funded program helping governments in that regard. And let me give you some examples of some of the work we're doing on the ground, in the context of some of the issues of interest in Vienna, like human rights, health and treatment, accessibility of drugs. We currently have 15 global, regional, and country programs on drug dependence, treatment and care in communities and in prison settings, and prevention of HIV, covering over 60 countries. In 2017 alone, we reached out to more than 100,000 people affected by drug use disorders, HIV, and hepatitis, of which about 40% are women and over 8,000 children. In the same year, we supported over 150 NGOs in 60 different countries, and have provided specialized training on health-related issues to over 600 NGOs and representatives in 23 countries. In 2017, we trained hundreds of policymakers, over 1,000 educators, and many others on the UNODC, WHO, international standards on drug use prevention. On human rights, most of our programs at a minimum integrate human rights issues and attention into their work. We have separate standalone programs that just deal with issues that are related to human rights, like our global program that focuses on alternatives to punishment and promoting standards and norms for prison settings, including implementation of the Nelson Mandela rules, and many other programs. And I mentioned the health and treatment programs. And of course, the program based on international standards of prevention. And WHO and UNODC recently published the second updated version of this international standards, which includes all the relevant recommendations of WHO recently in the field of healthy development of children and youth. Just a few, I'll stop because I'm running over my time, but these are just a few examples of what we're doing. And again, we cannot, there are so many sides to the drug problem, so many issues to giving a comprehensive and balanced approach, and we can't do it alone, and we try not to do it alone, but we hope also that others can be out there contributing to this, and I know they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. I think it has been very clear. And now I would like to give the floor to the Global Commission on Drug Policy. It's very happy to see you here. Professor Michel, it's always nice to see you. I've been seeing you for a while in several of the forums where we have participated. And it would be very nice also to hear from the Global Commission on Drug Policy, representing civil society through a group of former heads of state and senior UN officials, as you all know, and they have been a proponent of health and rights-based approaches, calling on the CND to include the international Geneva mandates concerns into deliberations. In this regard, what would be your take on the current progress in collaboration between the CND and the Geneva mechanisms, and what would be the elements that you would highlight as critical to a better coordination between Vienna and Geneva? Michel, thank you very much for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And on behalf of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, I would also like to thank you. Thank Ambassador Flores, the permanent missions of Austria and Switzerland, and the 10 other co-sponsoring missions that for having co-organized this Geneva-Vienna dialogue. And we hope that your visit here as chair of the CND will have allowed you to experience some of the spirit of collaboration, of interagency collaboration that preside to our work, I believe, in what we now call the Geneva ecosystem, and certainly on the issue of drugs and drug policy reform. Those same dynamics and that same spirit of collaboration and inclusiveness now need to be nurtured and strengthened between Vienna and Geneva. Drugs and drug policy are horizontal issues. They're cross-cutting, obviously, through different UN mandates. From our first report in 2011, the Global Commission has been saying that the war on drugs has failed and that it is urgent to change and to move towards drug policies that are more humane, more health-based, human rights-based, and evidence-based. And thank you, Kate, for saying that so clearly. The Global Commission has been calling on the Geneva-based organizations, as well as for UNDP in New York, to join the debate on drug control and lend their constitutional or founding mandates to the deliberations of the CND, and work more closely with Incb and UNODC in supporting countries in addressing the issue of illicit drugs, as well as that of access to controlled medicines for people in need. The CND's mandate is primarily with deliberations on drug control. However, drugs and drug policy are also about health, human rights, and development. The health and human rights associated issues relate largely to what UNODC has characterized as, quote, unintended consequences of drug policies. In fact, unintended consequences of the war on drugs. These issues that came so prominently in the outcome document of UNGAS 2016 are in the constitutional assignment of WHO and in the founding mandate of the Human Rights Council. The Commission has been advocating that evidence-based decision-making on drug policies always prevail. However, and sadly, as Kofi Annan said in his address at the WHA 3 years ago, drug policy has never been an area where evidence and effectiveness of policies have led the way. At a time when unsafe injecting drug use continues to account for 1/3 of all new HIV and over 2/3 of all new hepatitis C infections occurring outside sub-Saharan Africa, we should no longer accept that HIV transmission among people who inject drugs is recognized as a major deadlock and obstacle in the HIV response in Geneva, while the issue of harm reduction is hardly ever discussed in Vienna. It is now 10 years, or over 10 years, that these unintended consequences of drug policies have been identified without, I must say, much significant change having happened in the CND proceedings. We thus believe that a balanced approach to drugs and drug policy will not be achieved unless a stronger interinstitutional collaboration within the UN system is established. This issue is to us of major relevance and timely, and this is why I'm so pleased to be part of this panel today. And a stronger Vienna-Geneva dialogue is obviously a key element to achieve a consistent and effective global response to the challenges related to drugs that are debated and often in parallel, rather together, in both locations. Could we actually envisage that you, as chair of the CND, more regularly attend the March high-level segment of the Human Rights Council and the World Health Assembly? Could it be that the annual report of the INCB is presented to and debated in Geneva with the UN office in Geneva, WHO, UNAIDS, OHCHR, and the Geneva Civil Society Platform? That the human rights and drug policy guidelines, which Kate mentioned, and that are currently being prepared, be discussed and eventually adopted by both the CND and the Human Rights Council, and that UNAIDS, WHO, and OHCHR are more systematically allowed time on the agenda of the CND plenary and intersessional meetings. In addition to that, our Commission believes that it is time to see human rights and health-related indicators be part of the annual World Drug Report to ensure a comprehensive overview of progress and remaining challenges. In the SDG era, we all acknowledge that health and social challenges are complex and transversal, and that social, economic, and environmental policies are intertwined, so no technical body or agency can claim the exclusivity on the policy issue. Take the opioid crisis in the US, or the extrajudicial killings of people using drugs in the Philippines. Are these to be addressed by one or another UN agency, or wouldn't the world gain from more joint interventions as one UN of two or more key relevant agencies? Madam Chair, as UNODC Executive Director Yuri Fedotov has said, the conventions are not about waging a war on drugs, but about protecting the health and welfare of mankind. We all aim at this objective, as we all aim at a prosperous, rights-based and safe world by 2030. Public health is also the health of people who use drugs. Human rights are universal rights. They're also the rights of people who use drugs. Thank you.
Professor Kasachkain, thank you very much for your presentation, very clear and straightforward. And I think it's time to open a discussion. We have within the audience, where I am very pleased to have a special participation in this open discussion, of course, from everybody, but in particular from both distinguished persons. One is His Excellency Ambassador Valentin Selweger, Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the United Nations Office and other organizations in Geneva, and also Mr. Gerhard Dujak, Human Rights Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from the Austrian federal government. I'm very pleased to see you both, and so I would like to give you the floor so that we can start an open discussion on these very interesting presentations. Again, I would like to be to comment that this is, I think it's a very interesting panel. It's a very interesting side event, and the idea is really to enhance cooperation within the mandates of each of the agencies, and we're very happy to be here. So again, please, we're ready for the open discussion. So I give the floor to you both.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Switzerland very much welcomes this initiative to engage in an exchange and dialogue between Geneva and Vienna on the world drug problem. This event is an important step towards breaking the silos and towards implementing the 2016 UNGAS outcome document and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this context, we recall also the recent statement made by Secretary General Guterres at the 61st session of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, the CND, who tasked UNODC with working with other UN entities. In the early 1990s, open drug scenes were one of the most urgent problems in Switzerland, and you probably all remember these pictures of what was called the Needle Park in Zurich. The failure to dissolve the drug scenes by repression only made it obvious that a new approach was needed to address the issue. Public pressure led the federal government to introduce a policy based on the principles of health and human rights. This policy contains 4 pillars: prevention, therapy, harm reduction, and law enforcement. The change in policy led to a significant reduction in number of HIV/AIDS and hepatitis B and C infections, as well as drug-related death. Nowadays, open drug scenes in Switzerland have largely disappeared, and the number of drug addicts' crimes has become insignificant. This experience has certainly shaped our priorities at the international level. Nearly 2 years have passed since the adoption of the UNGAS outcome document, which was an important milestone towards drug policies more focused on health and human rights, and thus a shift away from a mostly repressive approach. Switzerland will also now, as a new member of the CND, remain active in upholding and defending the achievements of UNGAS and foster the debate on these important aspects. Vienna plays and will continue to play the central role regarding the world drug problem. However, a multifaceted global problem such as the world drug problem must be addressed through comprehensive strategies based on a multi-stakeholder approach, as was also indicated by Mr. John Brandolino. Geneva is one of the foremost centers of global governance and inter alia home to the health and human rights constituencies. With its focus on cross-sectoral and cross-institutional cooperation, Geneva is ideally placed to develop solutions to the multidimensional challenges we are faced with today. Switzerland is committed to increase communication and use of synergies between the various UN entities dealing with specific aspects of the world drug problem, such as UNODC, WHO, UNAIDS, OHCHR, and the General Assembly, and therefore strengthen the links between Geneva, New York, and Vienna. To conclude, let me just highlight some recent events or achievements that are important for our future discussions. First, last March, Switzerland and Colombia, together with other countries, sent a letter to Secretary General Guterres in order to recall the importance of the implementation of UNGAS and to promote close cooperation among all UN entities. The SG recently answered, welcoming the initiative. We will share the letter with all the permanent missions as soon as possible. Second, the 37th session of the Human Rights Council, the one that just took place last March, adopted a resolution presented by a core group led by Mexico and Switzerland that mandates the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to prepare a report on the impact of drug control on human rights. This proves once more that the human rights system has an important role to play in this context. And third and lastly, we would like to draw your attention to the guidelines on human rights and drug policy that are currently drafted by UNDP and the University of Essex with the support of the Swiss government. In order to promote coherence and enhance human rights protection, concrete standards are needed. This is a very concrete and specific effort to solidify the gains from the 2016 UNGAS outcome document. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zellweger. And I would like, thank you for that very good presentation. And I would like to also to hear and if Mr. Dujak, our good friend of Human Rights Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria, if you can share your thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And let me start with saying how pleased I am to see you here in Geneva in this important discussion. It is for me a very big pleasure to be part of this important event. And through you, I would also like to thank all the panelists. I think their contribution was very valuable for the discussion here today, and we're pleased, to follow this discussion, and I think it is an important opportunity. Our particular gratitude goes to the permanent mission of Mexico to have invited us and Switzerland to be co-sponsor of this event. As a strong advocate for human rights and public health, Austria has for years now applied the therapy over punishment approach in its national drug policies. This is why we deem inputs by OHCHR and WHO in the field of international drug policy as particularly valuable. In the UNGAS outcome document, the international community reached consensus for the first time on a far-reaching and holistic approach towards international drug policy. taking also into account human rights, gender, public health and development aspects. The panelists here today has shared their views and give us important insight and identified very clearly the complex and connected challenges when we address the international drug problem. We need, therefore, to look in the distribution of work and the effective coordination of individual policy areas. This issue becomes more and more important. We therefore will continue to rely on the Commission on Narcotic Drugs as the policy-making body of the United Nations with prime responsibility for drug control matters to skillfully lead the UNGAS follow-up process in an inclusive, transparent and comprehensive manner. We also count on the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes as the leading entity and the principal reference point in the United Nations system for addressing and countering the world drug problem. Based on its broad mandate, comprehensive expertise and established partnerships, within and outside the UN system, it represents the natural hub for concerted action. It is also clear that there are capacities and mandates within several other UN entities that have to form part of the coordinated efforts to achieve the optimum results in order to implement effectively the UNGAS outcome document and to achieve concrete results. WHO, OHCHR, UN Women, UNAIDS, UNDP, as well as others are expected to contribute meaningfully to addressing the world drug problem. We need to continue to work on strengthening the communication and cooperation to this end. Finally, I would claim that it is essential that we maintain our full attention and engagement on the coherent implementation of our joint commitments and avoid competing processes. We need to ensure a strong cooperation between the Vienna-based organizations and the Geneva-based organizations. After the successful Geneva-Vienna drug dialogue today, we would be pleased to engage also in a Vienna-Geneva drug dialogue at the Vienna International Center in the near future. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and great idea. And now I would like we have with us as well from UN family, Ms. Maria Luisa Silva, Director of UNDP's Representation Office in Geneva. And welcome as well, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me join previous speakers in congratulating the co-sponsors of this initiative because it's really important that we work across Vienna and Geneva in addressing and ensuring coherence in addressing the drug problem. This is also an important discussion for UNDP for 3 reasons. And firstly, because we believe that illicit drug markets and efforts to address them are a complex human development issue that cut across almost every one of the 17 SDGs, and we've been hearing that from previous speakers. This is about health, of course, and gender equality, but this is also about poverty, it's also about sustainable. It's critical to protect the health, the welfare, and the rights of the people who use drugs, who are frequently among those lagging further behind, but also, and as importantly, to reduce the negative impacts of drugs in hardly won development gains. And we've seen how societies have gone backwards in many indicators just because of the impact of drugs in recent years. We are therefore working, as Madam Deputy High Commissioner of Human Rights was saying, with sister agencies such as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UNODC, the UNAIDS, and the World Health Organization in developing international guidelines on human rights and drug policy, and we're very grateful to those supporting us, like Switzerland, in that effort. We already held a very successful consultation with member states last June in Colombia, and we are planning consultations also with member states next week in Bangkok and in July in Pretoria, and we invite as many as possible to contribute to them. There will also be a consultation in July in Amsterdam, and we really hope that we'll be able to have a product for discussion by early 2019. And the third reason why this discussion is important for us is because member states, but also the Secretary General, are asking all of us to work much more coordinated to implement UNGAS 2016 under the global leadership, of course, of the UNODC. And UNDP looks also forward to do its part and working with United Nations sister agencies and in line with the recently adopted resolution on the United Nations Development System reform, as well as our strategic plan, we are developing country platforms for integrated multi-sectorial responses that could play a role in bringing expertise from around the system and beyond in supporting countries to shape drug policies that promote the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Luisa. And I would like to give the floor, because there are several delegations that would like to speak at this point. And I see now the Russian Federation and then Uruguay, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. We consider it extremely important to further promote constructive interaction between Geneva and Vienna on the World Drug Problem. In the outcome document of the 2016 UNGAS on the World Drug Problem, the international community reaffirmed its commitment to respect, protect, and promote human rights, fundamental freedoms, the inherent dignity of all people, and the supremacy of law in the development and the implementation of the drug policy. We fully endorse this recommendation, being deeply convinced that the true progress towards a drug-free world is directly related to ensuring human rights and protecting the dignity of people. Moreover, the Russian delegation has always stated that delivering the world free from a narcotic illness is one of the most important human rights. Accordingly, states should make every effort and cooperate with each other with a view to guarantee the practical realization of this right. We are guided by this ideology in the context of the implementation of the decisions of the 2016 UNGAS, and we intend to follow the same course with regard to the next year's comprehensive review of the implementation of the Political Declaration and Plan of Action of 2009. The 3 UN Drug Conventions, the centrality of which was confirmed by the international community in 2016, remain the guiding thread in this process. We proceed from the fact that the Geneva segment should fully support the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs as the policy-making body of the UN system with the prime responsibility for drug control matters. We would like to note that the key role of the Commission as regards the UN anti-drug activities was once again clearly confirmed in the letter sent to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the 23rd of April this year on behalf of 22 member states. Madam Moderator, the resolution on the protection of children from the threat of illicit drugs adopted at the 63rd session on the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs at the initiative of Russia recognizes that an environment free of drug abuse and illicit drug trafficking is conducive to the development of well-being of children and therefore meets the best interests of the child. We hope that the relevant Geneva segments will contribute to the implementation of this resolution as well as to save children from the drug threat. We consider this task no less important than the protection of younger generation from armed conflicts and or from sexual exploitation. In December 2017, an important international conference, Parliamentarians Against Drugs, was held in Moscow. The final declaration of this well-attended forum recognizes the invaluable contribution of the civil society to the effective, efficient public capacity building to counter the spread of narcotic hazards, including reducing their impact of women, children, and young people. We believe that the existing UN fora, which unite and consolidate the efforts of civil society, should not be left out and should contribute to the advancement towards a drug-free world. We expect this issue to be fully reflected in subsequent initiatives in the follow-up to the decisions taken in Moscow. We intend to help in every way to achieve this goal. By the way, the online forum marketplace launched by Russia proved to be a very effective platform for interaction between representatives of civil society on anti-drug issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation, and I would like to listen to Uruguay. And next, Singapore, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and special thanks to all the panelists for their very insightful presentations. I got inspired by you, so that's why I wanted to take the floor. This is not the first time that a dialogue between Geneva and Vienna takes place on these issues. Uruguay and a group of countries, many of them that have been co-sponsoring this event, and others that are here also participating in the event, have been, let's say, pushing the agenda forward to open up the narrative and to try to really put in place a stronger dialogue among Geneva and Vienna, having the perfect moment when UNGAS took place. So we worked together, several countries pushing some international organizations really to contribute to Vienna, and we are very happy to see that the final result of what we had in UNGAS was something that opened up a little bit the narrative on drugs. So now the issue is implementation. Now what we have to be really working very hard is on implementing all these commitments that we have agreed upon. So I was very, very happy to hear all the panelists talking about human rights. It is not easy to have this. This was the common line that everybody had in your presentations, and sometimes I also had the privilege to follow WHO. It's not easy to link health and human rights, and for us in Uruguay, they are exactly the same. We cannot conceive health if we don't think under a human rights perspective. So. The health issues, all public policies have to be framed under a human rights based approach, and especially the ones dealing with drugs. This is what we have at the national level. Our national priorities put health, human rights, and the person at the center of the policy on drugs. Otherwise, for us, it is impossible to make any progress. So we really would like to thank all of you for putting this as a framework for the work that you are leading according to your respective mandates. But I would like also to say that I completely agree with what was raised by the Global Commission, in the sense that now that there is more dialogue among international organizations, we really would like you to strengthen and scale up the dialogue and translate it to having one UN working with countries. Really, countries need the support of the UN, need the expertise, but of all of you together. Working in silos is not helpful. It's not only a matter of dialogue, now it's also a matter of implementation. So a special request is to speed up a little bit the collaboration and to deliver it on the ground. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Singapore, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And my delegation thanks the organizers for this event, as well as the distinguished panelists for sharing their perspectives on the contributions of UN entities, both here in Geneva and Vienna, in addressing the world drugs problem within their respective areas of expertise and mandates. In particular, I'd like to thank the chairperson of the CND, Ambassador Buonarrostro, and Mr. Brandolino, who's come here from Vienna, for their insights on the comprehensive discussions taking place in Vienna and the role of the CND and the UNODC in the drugs issues. I think this would have been very useful for many delegations here in Geneva who are not likely to be very familiar with the role of the CND and the substantive work underway in Vienna. We agree with many of the points made by several of the panelists, including Mr. Brandolino, and his characterization as the Vienna-based agencies being, I think he called it, a global forum where all aspects of the drug problem are addressed comprehensively and in an inclusive manner where all stakeholders are at the table. We agree also with other speakers, including the distinguished representative of Switzerland, of Austria, as well as from Russia, that the CND is the UN body charged with the prime responsibility on international drug policy. But at the same time, we do agree and support contributions by all relevant UN entities to the work of the CND within their respective mandates. The focus should be on supporting the CND in enhancing the coherence within the UN system to deal with all aspects of the world drug problem, taking care to not create any duplicative processes that undermine the CND-led process. We also think it is very important for us to maintain a consensus-based approach when discussing the world's drug problem. This was highlighted by Executive Director of the UNODC, Mr. Yuri Fedotov, at the closing session of the most recent CND in March 2018. And we should be very careful not to undermine the hard-earned consensus on drug challenges in the CND and other fora like the UNGA and World Health Assembly. All these bodies are universal, and consensus exists currently in those bodies. Even as we try to make further progress on this issue in other relevant UN fora, we believe the principle of consensus is very important. And we are confident in this context that under the leadership of Ambassador Buenoroso at the CND, that the Commission will be effective. The Commission on Narcotic Drugs, that is, will be effectively guided in the preparatory process towards the ministerial segment for the 2019 CND. And if there's time for questions, I would ask the CND Chair for her views on the status of the preparatory process and how she plans to take it forward. For my delegation in Singapore, our hope is that it will continue as it has been. For example, in Singapore, we adopt a comprehensive harm prevention strategy, which seeks to proactively address the drug problem through targeted prevention, robust rule of law-based enforcement, and evidence-based rehabilitation for users. This has worked for us and our people, and finds, to borrow Deputy High Commissioner Gilmore's word, the right arbitrage. But we also hope, of course, that the 3 drug conventions and the 3 complementary and mutually reinforcing documents, I mean, we heard UNGAS being mentioned repeatedly, but UNGAS is part of 3 documents which support each other and cannot be and need to be addressed together. And these are, of course, the 2009 Political Declaration and Plan of Action, 2014 Joint Ministerial Statement, and very much so 2016 UNGAS Outcome Document. That all 3 of these mutually reinforcing documents will continue to guide international drugs policy going forward. And finally, we do agree that and believe that more needs to be done to promote international cooperation and dialogue. And in that context, I assure you, Ambassador, that here in Geneva and in Vienna, my delegation will be very active and very constructive in supporting you and all the other colleagues in taking the agenda forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me, of course, I will answer that question to you now, but probably at the end, so that I can give the time to other delegates that want to talk and present their elements. Now I have Egypt and then Greece.
Thank you, Excellency. Allow me at the outset to thank all the previous speakers for their comprehensive presentations. Excellency, while we welcome any dialogue in general between the different UN entities within their respective mandates, and while as well we reaffirm our commitments to the goals and objectives of the 3 international drug control conventions, including all aspects, we should not ignore the fact that the agreement among all member states to recognize the mandate of the Commission on Narcotics in Vienna at the policy-making body of the UN with prime responsibility for drug control matters was not random. It was based on the understanding that addressing the world drug problem has to be founded on a comprehensive and balanced approach that looks at all dimensions of the problem at the same time. Achieving such an approach can hardly take place if each of the UN organizations claims a separated part of the discussions without clear linkage with the rest of the topic. We believe that the Commission on Narcotics Drugs in Vienna, with its experts and experience, is the proper place to discuss the world drug problem with all its dimensions. We want to highlight that throughout year 2017, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs held 3 rounds of intersessional sessions with the main focus on each of the thematic chapters of UNGAS. The discussion on the human rights as one of the thematic areas has taken place as well, and the HRC and all relevant stakeholders were invited and presented in this meeting. All stakeholders were able to share their views, aiming at having the highest consideration of the whole UNGAS document. That means the views of the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms are heard in Vienna within the established channels. Finally, let me reaffirm our determination to tackle the world drug problem and to address all the social and health aspects related to it, but within the relevant UN mechanisms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Greece and then Malaysia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greece is happy to be one of today's event's co-sponsor. Since 2015, we have participated in efforts for the Human Rights Council to contribute to the development of a renewed approach to the world drug problem. Indeed, we are convinced that the world drug problem needs to be addressed in a more holistic way, than by sticking to the triptych demand reduction, supply reduction, judicial cooperation, which has clearly shown its limitations. This position is by no means revolutionary. It represents the most recent international consensus on the matter, as it has been accepted by the UN General Assembly in the 2016 UNGAS outcome document. The same opinion has also been expressed by other UN bodies and instances, as was made abundantly clear by today's panelists. The UNGAS outcome document introduced new considerations that need to be taken into account when addressing the world drug problem, one of which is the human rights perspective. Through the resolutions and side events we have co-sponsored, we have sought to establish the importance of introducing this perspective when shaping new international drug policies. This is why we consider today's event to be particularly timely, as it is very important to establish a dialogue between the CND, which has the principal role as the policy-making body of the United Nations with prime responsibility for drug control matters, and Geneva, with its competence and expertise regarding health and human rights. This is particularly crucial ahead of the CND's 2019 extraordinary session. We would therefore like to ask the panelists, if there is time, what would you consider to be next steps that could be taken in order to enable the Human Rights Council to better assist the CND in taking the human rights dimension in consideration when addressing the world drug problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being with us here in Geneva, as well as to the other panelists, both from Geneva-based, but especially for those that came from Vienna. As a co-sponsor and member of the core group, Guatemala is very happy to see developments on the implementation of the UNGAS declaration, particularly developments on the interagency coordination, as the different agencies have shared with us on concrete issues that are taking place. But more especially, I would say on the improvement of our shared understanding among member states. I have seen delegations that have objected in the past, in the recent past, even mentioning UNGAS in a resolution here in Geneva. And I see that this shared understanding is moving forward. I hope it will continue and hopefully will be delivered in the ground and make a change in the life of persons. On the way forward, many ideas have been already mentioned. We do think it will be very important to replicate this dialogue in Vienna, as some delegations have suggested. And on the ideas that Professor Kasachkin has mentioned, I would like to ask, he mentioned Incb report to be presented in Geneva and discussed. I would like to ask if this is possible for the Incb, or they need a special mandate, or it can be easily done, or what would be required for that to happen. And also on another proposal Professor Kasachkin made was to include in the UNODC World Drug Report indicators on human rights and health. So I would like to ask Mr. Brandolino if that is also possible for you to do already in UNODC, or do you need a special mandate from member states, from CND, or is it something that you could proceed? Because I would think this inclusion on the World Drug Report of health and human rights indicators will help strengthen the global scope and mandate that UNODC has as the main pillar of this war. Thank you.
Thank you. And Peru and the Philippines, so that after that we can proceed with some answers by the panelists, and we would be able to close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and welcome to Geneva. I would like to express Peru's appreciation to the permanent missions of Mexico, Switzerland, and Austria for organizing this very interesting event We believe that the promotion of dialogue and a better understanding of the synergies between Vienna and Geneva-based organizations is certainly welcome to better address the various implications of the world drug problem. That being said, Peru believes that the world drug problem should be addressed based on the principle of common and shared responsibility and under a balanced, comprehensive, sustainable, multidisciplinary, and evidence-based approach. We reaffirm the full validity of the three international drug control conventions, as well as the complementary nature and mutually reinforced character of the 2009 Political Declaration, the 2014 Zero Declaration and its plan of action, as well as the 2016 UNGAS document. Peru reaffirms that the CND has a principal role in the international drug control system, and we very much support the work conducted by UNODC and the Incb. Having said that, we also believe that it's important to strengthen cooperation and dialogue with other agencies of the United Nations, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the World Health Organization within their respective mandates. Peru is fully committed in addressing the world drug problem through policies that have the human being at its center. In this sense, the strategies for prevention of drug consumption, the reduction of illicit crops, and the implementation of integral and sustainable alternative development programs are carried out in strict observance of the principle of respect for the rule of law, human rights, public participation, and the sustainability and preservation of the environment. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Philippines, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for the organizers of this event. We have found the presentation of the WHO and the Incb useful. And I'd like to pick up on the interventions of the UNODC, Mr. Brandolino, on the examples of capacity building and training programs that the Philippines could pick up and consider. We agree with the points made by Switzerland, Austria, Russia, Singapore, Malaysia, on the importance of maintaining the primacy of CND and UNODC on this issue. In fact, we would caution against undermining the hard-won progress achieved on this forum. We are confident that the discussion in 2019 on the review of the CND will be useful for all parties, and we assure you that our delegation in Geneva, as well as in Vienna and New York, will be fully and engaged and very supportive of the comprehensive process of which addressing the drug problem should not be addressed only on one issue or one area, as well like Peruvian representative had mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're lagging behind in terms of time, so I see that there are some interventions also that want to be made by the U.S. and civil society, the Geneva Platform on Health. I would like, if it's possible, to keep your intervention short. Now, civil society, the Geneva Platform, please, and the U.S. And with that, we would go to the answers by the panelists.
From the Geneva Platform on Human Rights, Health and Psychoactive Substances. Thank you for giving me the floor. So the Geneva Platform on Human Rights, Health and Psychoactive Substances, on behalf of a number of civil society organizations, warmly commends the organizers of this dialogue between Geneva and Vienna-based UN entities and the speakers on the panel for the significant initiative representing for us civil society members a clear, concrete implementation of recent UN General Assembly and Commission on Narcotic Drugs recommendations on the need for increased interagency dialogue on drug policy issues. While the Commission on Narcotic Drugs leads on drug control policies, the UN system itself, through various resolutions adopted by member states, has made it clear that drugs are a horizontal issue requiring a societal response enshrined in human rights and citizen safety and allowing for sustainable development. The importance of increased UN interagency cooperation is reflected in the UNGAS 2016 outcome document and numerous CND resolutions. The UN Secretary General himself has recently called for strengthened cooperation between the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and other UN entities ahead of 2019. While UNODC is tasked with leading on this work, other UN entities should engage proactively in this important process towards developing an organization-wide strategy across the three founding pillars of the UN system: development, human rights, and peace and security, in support of the preparations for the 62nd session of the Commission to be held in 2019. As civil society organizations concerned with ensuring a coherent global drug policy, we are keen to see the outcome of this process.
Building on the UNGAS outcome document, we firmly believe that it is through interagency cooperation, such as today's initiative, that human rights, global health, and sustainable development will be better reflected in UN deliberations on drug-related issues, and that this constitutes a crucial part of achieving balanced and people-centered drug policies at the international, regional, national, and local levels. Towards this end, the strong engagement of the OHCHR at the 61st session of the CND in March this year was very welcome, and Geneva-based bodies, including OHCHR and relevant special procedures, WHO and UNH, should continue to ensure a strong presence in Vienna. We recommend that other entities should have standing invitations to the CND meetings, as well as expert meetings such as, for example, the review on the Annual Reports Questionnaire, otherwise known as ARQ. There is a pressing need for the ARQ to include existing health and human rights related indicators, to record the human rights and public health impacts of drug policies and reflect these in official reports. The UNODC could, for example, include other data sets in the World Drug Report to reflect human rights and public health, including harm reduction issues. The technical knowledge and expertise of the human rights and global health mechanisms based in Geneva should be utilized to address and prevent human rights violations in drug control. Indicators could focus on incarceration rates and rates of non-custodial alternatives to see if the commitments to proportionate sentencing highlighted in the UNGAS outcome document are being put into practice. Moreover, WHO, the Incb, UNODC, and OHCHR have all drawn attention to the fact that more than 75% of the world's population has no access to internationally controlled essential medicines, largely because of unduly restrictive regulations that derive from the supply control paradigm, and this is another point that must be addressed. Health and human rights apply to all drug policy issues, whether indigenous rights, proportionate sentencing, and alternatives to punishment for low-level drug offenses, the need to abolish the death penalty for drug offenses, to put an end to repressive, punitive drug policies, and the increasing call for decriminalization in many states around the world. The INCB has called on all states to implement international drug control conventions in accordance with the commitments to human rights treaties and the rule of law, while the High Commissioner for Human Rights has urged all states to examine the effectiveness and human rights impact of their current approach to the so-called war on drugs. It is only working with the Geneva-based mandates and civil society that these commitments can be successfully realized. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today as a civil society platform. We hope that other such dialogues will always provide space to hear from civil society representatives, and that our key role in supporting coordination between Vienna and Geneva will continue to be valued. We welcome the positive developments of the past few years in Vienna towards the greater inclusion of civil society, exemplified not only during the CND, but most recently in the INCB civil society hearing on the use of cannabis for medical and non-medical purposes, and hope that this trend will continue to become the operational and procedural norm. Today's dialogue marks the beginning of a new chapter of interagency dialogue and cooperation on how to address the world drug problem. And we look forward to continuing to contribute meaningfully to these discussions, ensuring that drug policies prioritize the needs of individuals and are aligned with the principles of health, human rights, and sustainable development, contributing to inclusive and prosperous societies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We're really lagging behind. I ask you to keep brief, to make no statements, but only make a short comment. I have the US, and I understand that AHPC and Human Rights Watch. But for the sake of time, may I ask you kindly to stick to only a couple of minutes, please?
Quick question at the end of that. The United States strongly supports continued efforts to implement the operational recommendations outlined in the 2016 UNGAS outcome document, which we view as a comprehensive and balanced approach to international drug policy that can help us respond to today's drug control challenges. The 2016 UNGAS represents the latest international consensus that incorporates our prior international drug policy commitments from the 1998 UNGAS and the 2009 Political Declaration and Plan of Action. As the latest international consensus, the 2016 UNGAS outcome document should guide our efforts jointly to address and counter the world drug problem beyond 2019. As several speakers have mentioned today, the United States is in the grip of a drug overdose emergency fueled largely by synthetic drugs, specifically fentanyl and its analogs. Therefore, we must use the operational recommendations in the ungas outcome document to think creatively about how to curb the illicit trafficking in these substances. The United States recognizes the important roles played by UNODC, INCB, and the WHO, and many others also represented here today, to address and counter all of these aspects of the world drug problem. Recognizing these important roles, we encourage the relevant entities within the UN system to engage in seamless and strategic coordination in their respective efforts to implement the 2016 UNGAS outcome document recommendations. My question to you all today is, it's particularly involving the area of technical assistance programming. Programs across the UN system should be strategically coordinated to complement and not duplicate efforts underway by other entities to address and counter the world drug problem. I would like to know from the speakers today how each UN entity can best offer its niche experience and the technical assistance offerings to be reflected in this and to ensure that we don't duplicate efforts and best use our resources. Thank you.
Thank you, IHPC and Human Rights Watch, and then we will go to the answers, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Catherine Pettis. I'm with the International Association for Hospice and Palliative Care, and I will respect your wish not to give a statement and just thank all the member states and civil society organizations and international organizations that have made this event possible, and also for your attention to lack of access to controlled medicines, which is the issue that I work on the most and that my organization works on the most. And just to say that this sort of multi-stakeholder dialogue is what we need to address what I would call the opioid availability ecosystem, which is now complicated by the American opioid overdose crisis, and then the flip side, which was drawn attention to, which is lack of availability in more than 75% of the world for people who need strong opioids for pain and palliative care. So my organization holds what are called opioid availability workshops in many countries to bring all the stakeholders together to try and address the barriers. And we're doing the best we can to, as an ECOSOC accredited organization, as well as a civil society organization in formal relations with WHO, to work across this ecosystem, but it needs to be taken further, so thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last one, Human Rights Watch, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also to our colleagues at the Geneva Platform on Human Rights, Health and Psychoactive Substances for their comprehensive statement, to which Human Rights Watch is also a signatory. Human Rights Watch has been conducting research and advocacy on drug policies for over 2 decades. Throughout all of our work, we've seen how over and over again drug policy has been a driver of human rights abuses. Despite billions of dollars spent by governments to tackle the problem, illicit drug use is up, and illicit drug use today are cheaper and more accessible than ever before. What's more, the so-called war on drugs has had disastrous and unintended consequences, as mentioned by my colleague, the Deputy High Commissioner, fueling human rights abuses, spreading violence, and placing people at increased risk of infectious diseases and other health harm in much of the world. Over the years, some have argued that the answer to the exploding violence and corruption is to vastly expand enforcement. With varying degrees of lawfulness, they have pursued, surveyed, killed, extradited, prosecuted, and imprisoned kingpins and low-income drug dealers alike. They've fumigated crops, paid farmers to grow other crops, and interdicted shipments. Yet, as the Global Commission on Drug Policy has stated, these vast expenditures have clearly failed to effectively curtail supply or consumption. Apparent victories in eliminating one source are negated almost instantly by the emergence of others. The recent resolution on drugs and human rights, adopted at the recent Human Rights Council session, marks an important step forward in how we tackle the world drug problem. Respect for human rights should be a central objective to any strategy, and it's becoming increasingly clear that Vienna mandate holders can no longer work in silos. Continuing to implement policies without taking into account other key perspectives, such as health and human rights, is no longer enough. For there to be an effective policy to tackle the world drugs problem, there should be a stronger engagement of Geneva health mandate holders, including the WHO and UNAIDS, together with the human rights expertise of the Human Rights Council and civil society organisations. In 2019, the current global drug strategy will expire. Today's very important dialogue could mark the new beginning of a comprehensive, rights-respecting approach to world drug policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And shall we listen to your answers? There were some questions, and we can start probably with the one on technical assistance. That was the last one presented by the US. And then there was one question for the Global Commission, one for UNODC, and one for INCB. So would you like to say something, Michelle, on the question posed by the US?
Sorry, I didn't get that. I heard the question on the technical assistance, and I can only say that, and that was in my statement, we want to see more of joint work on the ground, and I can only support that, and I thought that question was very reasonable.
Yeah, John?
Just to say that this is something, I mean, it's extremely relevant, and we deal with it on a day-to-day basis, you know, on the ground with all our programs. And I think, you know, I think we need to also bring in here the Secretary General's reforms, which are actually moving in a direction that will likely decentralize some of the decision making. You know, possibly it depends how member states react to it. You know, in the whole development area, and then also I think encourage more joint programming, people doing things together. I mean, the best way that we've found to work together is to do joint programming. We have a number of joint programs with even organizations outside the UN, so we try to do as much as we can. But it is something I think that we need to do better. I think we've tried to, you know, the Secretary General had an an executive committee meeting on drugs last year, and he actually tasked UNODC to work with all the UN agencies to strengthen our coordination. So we've done several things since then. We put together a calendar of events that all the agencies contribute to. We put together a matrix of activities so that people can see what types of programs and things are going on among the agencies, including joint programs. We've actually sent out letters to the field, a joint letter between the head of UNDP and the head of the executive director of UNODC went out to all the resident coordinators in the UN, giving them a copy of the UNGAS outcome document, and basically, you know, providing focal points in case they, you know, alerting them to this document and providing focal points in case they wanted assistance. There are other things that we're trying to do, including the strategy that was mentioned earlier, which we will be working on. But just to say that we can never do enough, and it's an important part of our work.
Thank you, John. Soumya?
I want to thank all the delegates who've made some really important observations and suggestions, and agree broadly that I think what we need now is implementation, and the implementation of jointly of all the different agencies involved and all the stakeholders involved, in fact, not just the UN agencies, but the stakeholders at the country level, in order to bring together the ministries of health and justice and law and so on, so that there's an informed dialogue and decision-making process. The other point is that was highlighted by the UNGAS and that we're moving forward on, I think, is a joint work between UNODC and INCB and WHO. There's already well-established mechanisms, including an interagency group on epidemiology, where we could document both the prevalence and trends of use and abuse, but also on the health effects and the harmful effects of drug use in countries, and also working together with UNAIDS. Of course, WHO's main role is a normative work, and that continues through the Committee on Drug Dependence, which evaluates every year the drugs to be added or not to that list, but also on guidance on risk reduction and on treatment and prevention services. So finally, I agree that I think most important would be the work in countries, joint work, and also WHO remains available to provide technical assistance to any country that may need that, to address both aspects, the use and abuse, the the necessity for use of these drugs in situations of palliative care, but also the managing the abuse of these drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. Bernard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next time, I think you will have to put a full day.
Yeah.
Because it's only an appetizer. When we were sharing, there was a lot of very interesting comments and proposals, and about what was said regarding what could do Incb. I would like to invite you to send a specific request to our president, and we will be very happy to work on it. This week, for the first time, we organized a real good meeting with representatives of the civil society, and we are committed to progress in that way. So the purpose today is working together to achieve sustainable solution in addressing the world drug problem. I would like to try to be more concrete. One of the key issues is the flexibility of the main mandatory requirement of the 3 UN conventions. And Incb is not afraid to work on it with you, and also about the requirement of the Article 3, Paragraph 2 of the 88 Convention to criminalize the personal possession. Our feeling in Incb is there is now a common feeling in the world that even if the Paragraph 2, it's written criminal offense, and very often the states understood imprisonment, there is a common agreement on the idea that imprisonment is not appropriate to deal with drug abuse. That is your responsibility, you state, of course, maybe to change the Paragraph 2, and that would be very easy. But I think that will be very difficult to have a common consensus. So we have to try to see which type of flexibility we could introduce at this level. And something else. I was during 10 years a judge specialized in drug cases, and I identified a lot of fields where there is strong interference between human rights fields and legal field. I'm going to give you some examples. For example, and I am going to be very frank, law enforcement people like to make good data. And then the purpose is more to arrest drug addicts than drug traffickers. Because one drug addict arrested is a case which is solved. Arresting 10 traffickers, the case is not solved because there is still other criminal in the network. And then this is something which is embarrassing from a human rights point of view, but also from an efficiency point of view. Because at the time you are arresting the guy with one cigarette of hashish, you don't work after the big network. A lot is done also by police forces, of course, and very important work and very difficult. But sometimes at local level we have such a problem. Another problem, in some countries you can have 10 grams of cannabis, in some other one 30 grams, in some other one. There is a problem of, in French we said, vérité en deçà des Pyrénées, mensonge au-delà. We have to address these issues. There is also a lot of other points, and for example, I saw very difficult point in some country where they have death penalty when it's at 10 grams. What is the quantity? Is it only the pure ingredient, or is it the total amount which was seized? So I identified maybe 50 areas where we could work together, Incb and the human rights institution. So that was just a few words against an appetizer, but I hope we will have a real follow-up after this meeting. Thank you.
Very good. Just for the sake of time, what I think, would you like to make any further comments? If not, what I would like to say, only as the chair of the CND before the closing remarks by Ambassador Flores, is you know that we got a very procedural resolution at the last CND, and there are still a lot of pending work that has to do with the scope and the substance of the ministerial segment, the intersessional period, and the outcome of the ministerial segment. I just want to assure all of you, we're here firstly and mostly because we want to enhance cooperation, because the drug problem is a global issue and because it's a very transversal issue. So that's why it's important. But we're here to try to work according to the mandates and to enhance cooperation. My intention will be to, by the end of the CCPCJ, to start with informal consultations as well with everybody, because I think it's important to work for the intersessional period and then be able to see what the outcome might be. My idea, of course, is to be able to move into the one track, because I think it's important. I have many times said, and I want to stress again, that the one track, it's a very important one. All international engagements and commitments that we have made are important, but this is an evolving issue as well, and I want cooperation to be the most important feature for until the end of December, and then looking forward to 2019. So I am really eager and ready to work with all of you, and be assured that my responsibility will be, again, to be as transparent and engaging as possible, and please feel free anytime also to approach me. And now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Flores for conclusion remarks, and thank you very much for being here this morning and afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No conclusion remarks. It will be very difficult to really make a kind of conclusions of this. I just really want to thank all of you for your comments, for your participation. It was supposed to be 1 hour and a half event. We were here more than 2 hours. Thank you very much to all of you that stayed with us. Thank you very much for all of you that are coming from Vienna. And I think the common denominator is that we need to continue the dialogue and collaboration towards the implementation of what we have on the table. I think many of you said the importance of keeping this, and now I'm very glad because we are not only having the Geneva-Vienna dialogue, but we are going to have the Vienna-Geneva dialogue. And I hope this is only going to be the beginning of a conversation we need, because as we have seen, there is one leading agency, but there are many mandates that needs implementation, and to ensure effectiveness, we have to work together. So thank you very much. I'm sure this was the appetizer. It will continue. I wish you a very good lunch to all of you, and we will continue having these exercises because I know there is of the interest of all. Have a good trip to Vienna to all of you, and hope to see you. I hope to be invited to the Vienna dialogue. Thank you.
It was very good. Excellent discussion.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Very happy with you here.